You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. I am Gilad Halpern. Welcome back. I'm now joined here in the studio by Noga Kadman. She's an Israeli researcher and tour guide, and also the author of the recently published Erased from Space and Consciousness, Israel and the Depopulated Palestinian Villages of 1948. It was recently published in English by Indiana University Press. The book doesn't only trace the ruins of hundreds of Arab-Palestinian villages in the current physical landscape. More importantly, it tries to place them in the discursive or ideological landscape of contemporary Israel. Hello, Noga, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello.
So this is quite a daring endeavor for an Israeli researcher, as it really touches upon one of the biggest taboos in the current Israeli climate. Well, not just the current Israeli climate, the very fundamentals of the Israeli discourse. Are you really the first Israeli researcher to undertake that kind of project?
Actually, when I began dealing with this kind of research, it was 1999, and at that point, I think there were very few Israelis who dealt with these issues. I think nowadays there are many more people and even organizations that deal with the Nakba and what happened in 48 and then try to spread information about it.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that you brought something special to the table as a Jewish Israeli researcher studying this topic?
My book was first published in Hebrew, and it was actually the first book that dealt specifically with the issue of the erasure of the Palestinian villages from the Israeli discourse.
So how many villages are we talking about here? We're talking about hundreds of villages, right?
Yeah, there are at least 400 villages, depends on how you count and who counts. But there are hundreds of villages that are now empty within the boundaries of Israel.
Mm-hmm. And by empty, you mean that the structures are still there, but nobody lives in it? Or the structures are there and other people, namely Jews, live in it? Or that the villages have been razed after their seizure?
Most villages were completely demolished already in 48, 49. In some, only one or two structures remains, and several have the still structure standing, and in most cases, Jews live in these structures now.
Oh, so in most Palestinian villages are today populated by Jews?
Not most of them. Most of them are empty and distracted, but several dozens were depopulated by Jews.
Okay, so if all of them are, or many of them are completely erased, not just from consciousness, but also from the physical landscape, how did you go about locating and finding them?
When I did the research, there are no Hebrew map that shows these villages. So one of the things I did, the first thing for the research, is taking contemporary maps and put all the Palestinian villages on them. And I used British maps from the 40s and other information that was published by Palestinian researchers such as Walid Khalidi that locates all the villages. And then I could figure out where are the villages in today's landscape.
Mm-hmm. And did you actually go there to the site to see what remains?
Yeah, I visited around 250 sites of villages. Mainly I went to nature reserves and national parks and the JNF forest to see which are tourist sites that contain the populated villages, to see what information is delivered to the public that visit these places about the villages. I also went to kibbutzim and moshavim that were built on villages.
Mm-hmm. And what about the official attitude towards them right after the war? You said that many of them were demolished right after the war in 48 and 49. Was there really a concerted effort to remove them from the landscape so that they'll be literally gone?
Yeah, definitely. It was a policy. There was a decision that first was not obvious like today of the Israeli government not to allow the refugees to come back to their homes. Mm-hmm. And one of the methods to prevent the return was to demolish all the houses. So that was done intentionally. Mm-hmm. And later on, there are houses still standing, and there are attempts to cleanse the landscape from the ruins, the Arab ruins, because it's considered something that is not relevant to the new Jewish modern landscape.
But why would demolishing the houses prevent their claim of return if they can't even enter the territory?
In the 50s, the borders were not so much closed as today, and people could try to enter. And Israel tried to prevent it also by gunfire.
Right, okay. And was there really also an effort, or in all the documents that you've read and researched for this for the book, did they try, the Israeli government, the officials, try to suppress any kind of debate around it by removing them, or was it just, a logistical / technical decision just to demolish the buildings so that they won't be populated again?
There were several motivations to demolish the buildings, and some of them were clearly to cancel a debate. For example, Golda Meir and Ben Gurion said that we don't need these ruins. Tourists come and ask questions, so let's erase them.
Right. And what about how people react to the ruins? I'm talking especially about, you said that there were some kibbutzim and moshavim that have been set up on the ruins of villages. I mean, there are places in cities and perhaps elsewhere, in Jaffa, in West Jerusalem, where Jews, many of them newcomers, were given Arab houses as the new homes. Did anyone ask any questions? Was there ever any debate around that question? Who were until now the legal owners of these houses, and where are they?
This is one of the things I wanted to research for the book. I went to archives of kibbutzim and moshavim to read their writings from 49, the 50s, and to see if there were this kind of dilemmas and debates that they are living in houses that used to belong to others. And I saw, in most cases in the writings, there were no such debates. They all acknowledge that our kibbutz, our moshav, was built on this and that Arab village. But in very few places I found such dilemmas. But some kibbutzim, the members in 49, in the 50s, did dealt with moral dilemmas and the question, is it moral for us to live in houses of people that were...
And what was the answer? Yes.
The answer eventually was, we didn't choose it, this is not what we choose, but this is what happened, and we have to stay in our land and defend our borders. We cannot allow them to return.
Mm-hmm. Were there ever serious attempts to come across the border and look for the villagers themselves, maybe try to recuperate some of the property that was left behind? Was there any sort of attempted engagement on the part of the Palestinian refugees to come back to the villages quite physically? I mean, we're talking about the 50s when as you said, the borders weren't as sealed as they are today. But when we, at least when people talk about the Palestinian right of return, it's all a very theoretical kind of, perhaps moral question. But was there any attempt at a physical engagement with a question in the past?
In the 50s, it was not a theoretical question. People were just found themselves without all the property and their agricultural lands with nothing across the border. So, of course, naturally, people tried to return. And many did. And at that time, Israel even allowed some groups to return. So quite a few people returned to villages in the Galilee. And others tried and were blocked.
Yeah. So why did Israel allow some people to return and others were turned down?
It's the same question as why certain villages stayed and others were depopulated. Sometimes there were pressure groups like Christian villages. There was some pressure from Christian world to allow some villages to return, and other local decisions. And some just managed somehow to sneak in and stay.
And really, it brings us to another question. Why were there some villages that, why wasn't there, if there was indeed an ethnic cleansing of the Arab-Palestinian population of Israel, why wasn't a sweeping one? Why, I mean, in the Galilee, even in the 50s, before the Judaization of the Galilee in the 1960s and onwards, the Arab-Palestinians were a majority in the Galilee. So it doesn't really square with the grand scheme of the Zionist leadership. How do you explain it?
I myself don't think there was a grand scheme to begin with before 48 to clear all the Palestinian presence from Israel. I think it's something that happened during the war, and Israel was happy with it and encouraged it. But I don't think the idea was to begin with to transfer all the Arabs. And there were local events. It depends on the local commanders and the nature of the village, the way they are cooperated. It depends on from place to place.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any kind of political implication to your work? Will it fan the flames, as it were, of the Palestinian claim for return, or maybe enliven the debate, or maybe would label you as a traitor to the Jewish-Israeli cause? What kind of political repercussions do you think your work has?
I think for many in Israel, looking at the other side and its history and try to acknowledge what we did wrong already put you with a traitor. So in this sense, maybe yes. What I hope that this kind of work will do is just that we learn that we have to open our eyes to what really happened in 48 and what we're trying to hide today, and to try to face it, and then to move on to where we should look for solutions.
Is that really why you think that the villages were erased from the consciousness, because it was simpler for the Israelis to deal with the history this way?
Yeah, it was both the practical reason not to give motivation for the returnees, and also for the Israel not to ask questions and not to know so much about what happened and what was here before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Noga Kadman, an Israeli researcher and tour guide, and author of the recently published Erased from Space and Consciousness, Israel and the Depopulated Palestinian Villages of 1948. It recently came out in English and was published by Indiana University Press. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you.
רגליים במים